Good morning, and welcome to the fourth and final day of United Facts of America, a festival of fact-checking. Yesterday, big tech companies took center stage. Today, it's all about you. How can you be a better steward of our democracy and truth? And how can you have difficult conversations with people who are prone to share or fall for misinformation? I'm Angie Drobnik-Holin. I'm editor-in-chief of PolitiFact. We want to know, have you had difficult conversations with people recently, a friend or a family member or a neighbor, about a piece of misinformation they shared? How did it go? Were they willing to hear what you had to say? We want to hear from you in the chat. Tell us about your recent experiences. We have a great lineup for you today. First off, right off the bat, we're going to hear Poynter President Neil Brown interview international journalist Cristiane Amanpour. After that, PolitiFact's Rebecca Catalanello will be in conversation with Stephen Hassan, a mental health counselor and author of the book, The Cult of Trump. At 12:10, you'll hear from academic researchers Ethan Porter and Emily Thorson on what they've studied about the effectiveness of fact-checking. At 12:35, we'll hear about Microsoft's Defending Democracy project. Then at 1:05, I'll be back with Kathleen Hall-Jamieson of factcheck.org, Steve Hayes of the Dispatch, and Sally Lehrman of the Trust Project. We'll be talking about how journalists can build trust and help people defend themselves against misinformation. Please note this last panel starts a little later than what was in your email this morning. It starts at 1:05. We're really glad you decided to join us today and that you share our belief in the importance of truthful, trusted information. If you have to drop out at any point, don't worry about it. Once the conference is over, we will have videos of all the presentations so you can catch up on your own time. I'd like to thank everyone at the Poynter Institute and PolitiFact behind the scenes who made this event possible. Our team is in the chat to answer any questions you may have. This is our first ever festival of fact-checking, and we couldn't be more pleased about how it's going, and thank you for all your participation. We'd also like to thank the sponsors who made this festival possible. Those sponsors include Craig Newmark Philanthropies, Facebook, TikTok, Microsoft, AmeriHealth Caritas, Google News Initiative, Smart News, the Trust Project, and the Go Fact Yourself podcast. As I said, we're excited to lead off this conversation with Neil Brown, the president of the Poynter Institute, and Cristiane Amanpour. Cristiane is CNN's chief international anchor who in over 35 years of journalism has covered some of the biggest stories of our time and interviewed world leaders around the globe. Cristiane is also an ambassador for the Poynter Institute's MediaWise project, which aims to help people of all ages and backgrounds sort out fact from fiction online for themselves. Neil, are you ready for today's conversation?
Oh, absolutely. What a great week it's been, Angie. I mean, the excitement and the level of conversation is great. And to be able to kick today off with Cristiane Amanpour is an absolute treat and should be terrific. So
it's been a great week. I know all the fact checkers at PolitiFact have been really just invigorated by this week and all the conversations we've had about people who care about facts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, among them, first and foremost, is probably Cristiane Amanpour, who, as Angie, you noted, is really one of the most distinguished and influential journalists around the world. So we didn't spend much time on an introduction. We're delighted to have her as part of our MediaWise team. That's got to be a big honor for Cristiane, right up there with being a commander of the Order of the British Empire, Cristiane, wouldn't you think, going forward? I don't know how that sort of ranked.
It's hard to say which one is higher.
I appreciate that more than you know. So anyways, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the United Facts of America Festival. As Angie said in her little introduction there, today we're talking a lot about, the theme of the conference has certainly been misinformation and how to battle it and what its consequences for democracy here and around the globe. But we also, part of that conversation goes to trust, issues of trust. And there's a lot of difficult conversations, as Angie suggested, about the role of the journalist going forward. I've listened to you speak a number of times, and there's in journalism today, there's a big debate going on, probably always has, between those who think we're too objective and always trying to engage in something called both sidesism or false equivalency, and others who think we're totally clearly biased in one direction. I've heard you talk about, I'm almost say it's a mantra of yours, truthful, not neutral, as you describe yourself. Truthful, not neutral. Give us a little take on how you see it, and what does that mean to you?
Well, I'm really happy to open with this issue, and then we can talk about, the overriding issue, which is that, the degradation, if you like, the dissolution of the idea and the concept of truth. And so let me just explain to you what I mean about truthful, not neutral. What I mean is that we can be objective, and we should be objective. That is the journalist's golden rule, to be objective. But I do believe we have to define objectivity for what it actually is. And actually, objectivity is not whataboutism. It is not about drawing false equivalences, either factual or moral. It's not about taking any issue, whether it be, genocide or the climate or the US elections or anything else happening around the globe, COVID, for instance, and saying, well, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, and pretending that there is an equal amount of fact and truth in each basket. That's not always, if ever, the case. So I do believe that when we seek the truth, we are being objective. And in my experience, because I have covered so much around the world that is not inside politics, but it is about huge international issues of life and death, of aggression and victimhood, of massacre and survival. And particularly it started for me in Bosnia. And I had to report the truth, which was there was one side that was being aggressed, started with what's known as ethnic cleansing and then full-blown genocide by another side. And I could not equate those two sides. And I refused to equate those two sides. I was just doing my job, telling the truth and bringing the facts. And I did get some pushback from fellow journalists, from government leaders who didn't want to intervene to stop the war in Bosnia. And they accused me of siding with one side or not being objective. And it caused me to really think about this. That's why for the last close on 30 years, I have used all that experience and all the subsequent experience in my coverage to really focus on this notion that being objective is being truthful, which means that you can tell all sides of the story, obviously, and you should. But doesn't mean to say you equate all sides, and particularly in the worst, the worst violations of international law, such as genocide and mass murder.
Well, I think you've talked in the past too about how, particularly in wars like the Vietnam War, that kind of correspondence really helped enlighten the public about what was truthfully going on. But in this polarized society we're in right now, it feels like when we do that, there's about half the audience that we're alienating. So do you think about how to win over others, even with this honest approach to reporting and the truth?
Well, look, I can only talk for myself, and that is, I believe I'm a very open book. People who come to my program know me and know of me from before I sat in an anchor desk. They know me from the field, and they know that I've been struggling with all sides, that I, hold leaders and those who, purport to be in positions of power accountable, and that I'm very clear about the human factor, the human cost of what's going on, and that I am very rigorous, some might say aggressive, but I'm also very fair. I'm not a gotcha journalist. I'm not just seeking to lob a question to receive some kind of, strange headline or whatever. I really do believe in trying to get to the bottom of what's going on, but more importantly, or as importantly, to be the eyes and ears and the voice of whoever's watching, reading, accessing online, or in any other way what I'm doing. So, that's what I hope. Now, the real problem is that there is an unprecedented assault in our democracies on the truth. There always has been in dictatorships and authoritarian systems. Russia, I would say, pretty shortly after the Cold War, perfected the idea of asymmetrical warfare, which was an information war. And we called it propaganda at the time, but it was a very sophisticated use of lies and of conspiracy theories and changing the dynamic. So we have to be very careful with what we're seeing. And to me, that is the most difficult aspect of what we're going through right now, because when Russia was doing it and there was no social media, that was one thing. You know, it went through certain channels. Probably a lot of people believed, I don't know, that the CIA killed John Kennedy or the CIA caused AIDS or whatever it was, which, you know, started by very clever Russian placement of disinformation. But now all of this is on social media. And it has become a massively polarized world. It's not just in the United States, it's all over the place. And furthermore, democracies are backsliding, not into full-scale authoritarianism, but into some kind of weird hybrid. Actual elected democracies are, you know, in a way that we could never have imagined, backsliding their own political systems. So I think that's, you know, that's very troubling for those of us who try to report the truth.
Would you say that that kind of propaganda or the conspiracy stuff that you described in Russia, obviously some of that is very alive and well in the United States right now in the sort of polarized environment. Is that what we're seeing, not just on social, but on cable between, say, Fox or OAN or CNN, some would say? Are we just sort of divided up into propagandists versus not? Or I'll put it a different way. Do people make a distinction between pundits and journalism?
Well, look, I think that there's no doubt that Fox News is a signed up arm of the Republican Party. It is the propaganda arm of the Republican Party, and that's not the same case with CNN at all. Our mantra is facts first. However, there is a polarized environment, and it does show up on cable and elsewhere. You know, it's all part of now a great big ecosystem that we try to punch through at CNN and really try to bring the truth of what's going on. Having said that, also there is a much bigger reliance in terms of the pie that's divided up between, let's say, anchors, reporters, pundits, a much bigger reliance on pundits these days, who by nature of being a pundit have political positions and political views. What I think is that, you know, you can say that's the same case as, for instance, in a newspaper, when you've got the news pages and the editorial pages, etc., and then the op-eds. What I feel is that we must be very clear in terms of separating what is news and what is opinion. And, you know, this is a constant struggle to keep up with and keep a grip on what's actually happening and report what's actually happening. And, you know, Ted Turner, when he started CNN, was very clear. The news is the star, is what he said. And, you know, some people thought that was a bit of a slogan and what did it really mean? But in all these years later, you can see that we need to somehow realign now. And I mean the whole media landscape. I'm not talking about CNN. I'm talking about everybody needs to realign and rededicate and recommit ourselves to upholding the news and then having whatever other discussions and editorials and all the rest of it, pundits, panels, you know, elsewhere, clearly marked. That's what I think we need to be doing. You know,
I wonder, the economics, I don't know if it's economics necessarily, but it seems like it's expensive to send people out into the field like you went. And even though these big organizations, I think, have the wherewithal, it feels like you see more panels than you do see sometimes reporting out on the ground. Do you feel that way, or am I worried for nothing? It seems like there's less reporters on the ground these days. We know locally that's true for sure.
I think you're right. I mean, the financials dictate, and sometimes they dictate away from news coverage and towards bottom line. The great Katharine Graham, who ran the Washington Post after her husband died and ran it so successfully as publisher and was very close to the editor, obviously, Benjamin Bradley, you know, she said, great journalism is good for business. So she was very clear that her business model was enabled by the great journalism that they could translate into a fantastic business. I think that you could see CNN, and we're probably, I would say, the leading, certainly American network in terms of reporting overseas, in terms of sending reporters and teams overseas. You can count any number of stories over the past year and before, and see that we're all over the place covering it. However, I do also think that what you've said is correct, that from the local news on up, there are less resources being devoted to the actual coverage of news. And I like to go back, and I think I'm partly correct in this. I haven't done a scientific study or even a poll, but after the election of Donald Trump, or even after Brexit here, there was such a, oh my God, how could that have happened? Nobody knew. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Well, potentially nobody knew because there weren't enough people on the ground in the small markets where it mattered and where this sort of insurgency, this political revolution was happening. So I think that we need to have reporters on the ground because they are, again, the experts who know exactly what's going on the ground. Yeah.
We're getting some good questions from the audience. I'm going to turn to into a moment, but I want to stick with one more aspect about the sort of the polarized nature. Jake Tapper the other day said he's starting to think that he's not going to invite on some Republicans who keep perpetuating Donald Trump's lie that he didn't lose the election. That's a potentially controversial way to do it and say that you're not going to have on a part of the American power structure because you think they're going to lie. You do a lot of interviews. How do you think about whether your guests are going to be telling the truth and how do you prepare for it? And do you think Tapper's right that you should be not inviting people on if you think they're going to create misinformation?
Well, look, it's really complex, this, and I have some sympathy for Jake. And I will say that, for instance, on my program, I don't have on climate deniers. I just don't. There is no equal debate, and it's driven us to the brink of an existential, civilizational moment of extinction. And I think I'm very careful about that. We've done all the arguments about what they say and this and that, but there's simply no reason to pretend that there's an equal level of facts and truth and science on this hand as there is on that hand. So I say it out loud and I don't do it because I think we've lost a lot of time on that. Regarding what Jake said, it's clear that there is a big lie, right? Even Republican elected officials have called it that, whether they are Liz Cheney, who's now been booted from her position, whether it is Brad Raffensperger from, the Republican Secretary of State who was in charge of vote counting in Georgia and certifying the elections, whether it was Republican appointed, even Trump appointed judges when some of the election questions were taken to court, they all said, no, there is no widespread fraud. This was a legitimate election, and this is how it turned out. This is the data. These are the facts. So I think you ask yourself, why then, once this has been resolved, would you keep putting on people who insist on lying and muddying the waters? We know they exist, and in fact, we know that they have a big hold on a big party, the Republican Party, in a two-party system. So I think that's something that Jake will decide on his own. But I would go back to, and this is really important, back to the 50s, Joe McCarthy and his Red Scare. So he was all over the media, he was all over Congress, and he was, peddling his lies, right? A red under every bed, I've got a list, all of these are communists, the way he blacklisted and destroyed people's lives based on nothing but rumor and innuendo. It took two journalists to say enough already. And the way they did it was to say, we will not host you on our platforms unless you can produce and provide the basic amount of evidence that you would if you were going to take this to a court. Do you see what I mean? In other words, you cannot just come onto our organizations and our platforms and out lie. You must be able to have the evidence to support what you say, and not just, oh, I believe that and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And it was obviously Edward R. Murrow, who held him accountable. And then, and I don't remember the name, but I believe it was the editor-in-chief of what's the Detroit Free Press, maybe? Anyway, it was a very important editor at the time. And that immediately stopped or correlated with McCarthy, getting much less press and therefore much less able to peddle his vicious and harmful lies.
Yeah, good example. We'll weave in some questions from our audience. Jenny wants to know if you think about a story that you could tell us about recently when you felt like your work, your piece, particularly enlightened somebody who was otherwise misinformed. What stands out for you recently in that space where you feel like maybe I'm getting to some folks?
Look, it's hard because I don't have a huge amount of, I don't engage a lot with, I don't know, I hope folks are being informed rather than misinformed, but obviously I've taken on difficult issues, which have suddenly become politicized over the last year, whether it is the basic demand and right for justice, whether it's the notion that, Black lives matter, or Asian lives matter, or human rights matter. Those kinds of things have suddenly become very political. And so you try to, whereas it's actually a matter of human rights, civil rights, and basic human and humanitarian law. And so I hope I've been able to open, people's eyes to some of those issues and explain certain issues. And particularly, okay, let's take one issue, which I think has been very polarizing, the idea of defund the police. So what does that actually mean? Is it just a slogan? Is it just, let everything go wild? Redirecting funds for a better police, and a better idea of law and order, and also attending to society's social ills that need to be attended to and that are not, and that are thrown into the basket of a police force that's ill-equipped and unequipped to deal with it. So that's one issue. On the pandemic, vaccines, masks, all those issues that are medical issues that have become political. I've tried very hard, and I do not sit in my chair and say, you're wrong, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, I'm right, listen to me. No, I don't do that. I bring on the experts. And I think that that's what we try to do. Having said that, vaccine hesitancy and conspiracy theories about vaccines have been around since smallpox, or since the very first vaccines were created. It's just everything is that much more toxic and exponentially divisive because of social media and because of the political environment in which we live now. And it's very similar. This is not just the United States, it's all over the world. It's not just in democracies, it's also in dictatorships and authorities.
Well, so let's go wide on an issue that's obviously was very polarized before the pandemic and the elections, and it's happening again now, which is the Middle East and what's going on in Israel right now. How are you assessing that situation? And the power of social media, we have found, certainly puts all kinds of opportunities to see what's going on from people who may or may not be journalists, obviously, in terms of transmitting cell phone images, things like that. How do you see the situation now, and do you feel how's it getting covered now that it's flared back up again?
Well, look, it's another very, very difficult story, and it's been going on for 70 plus years. It's just again a very politicized story that eventually needs to be dealt with, with a final peace process. And the longer that keeps being put off, the more often you're going to see these flares. The violence is just a symptom. It's a symptom of the fact that for now going on, I would say 10 or 12 years, there has not been a serious effort to revive a serious peace process. The last time that was attempted was in the early 90s with the Oslo process, and that actually did bring benefits. It then collapsed because there was the last element of it, the final agreements were never sorted out. But if you look soon, I think HBO is going to show the film called Oslo, which has been made by the producers of the play Oslo, and based on, I'm proud to say, my two friends, Terry Rode Larson and Mona Jewel, two Norwegians who brought both sides together and who brought adversaries together and put them around at the table and came up with, at least the first round, the first basis of what might look like a, peace negotiation between Israelis and Palestinians. In my opinion, again, this is well, it's not my opinion, it's a fact. This is a highly sensitive issue that you can barely talk about without one side accusing you of being anti-Semitic and another side accusing you of being Islamophobic. And it's a very difficult subject to cover, and I will say that. And the tragedy for me, because this is how I've spent my career, watching civilians being caught up in the machinery of death that needs a political solution to end. So when I see children, when I see women, when I see non-combatants being killed, I just feel it's so terribly sad. And I can't understand why the recipe is there for both sides: justice, security, rights for both sides. The roadmap is there. They just have to get together and put it together.
Yeah, no, unbelievably heartbreaking. One of the things that fact checkers battle, or independent journalists in general, is covering a story like that is you tend to sometimes fall back on the data, sort of the body count, the injury count, because we're constantly looking for something kind of neutral, maybe that we can assess something that's not very neutral, but you hear a lot of both sidesism accused in this story, and often they default to numbers, which may be appropriate. I don't know if you think about data.
Well, look, I mean, the numbers are, again, they reflect a certain power dynamic, that's for sure. But it's not the whole story. The whole story is that there needs to be a solution that provides justice, freedom, and independence for one side, along with justice, freedom, security for the other side. And I think that is just so uncontroversial that it's hard to understand. And I do strongly believe that each time there's a flare-up, and each time there is a child, one woman, one man who is a non-combatant, who is slaughtered in any way, and I'm not talking about soldiers or militants, I'm talking about the civilians who are caught in the middle of this, it should really, try to focus those who are in power to try to do something about this.
We got time for a couple more questions. Here's one that's fun. So who was, do you think, the most honest or truthful person you've interviewed among the sort of the leaders and all of that struck you as this is a pretty solid citizen? And there's a flip question to that, you might imagine.
It's going to be who was the most dishonest. Well, look, I would say in all my years of interviewing world leaders, and particularly in this particular, we just talked about the Middle East, I think King Hussein of Jordan, who is no longer alive, but who was, the second Arab leader to make peace with Israel after Egypt did, I think he was a very, very honest person. I think his life experience showed him that no matter who won a war, who started a war, who lost a war, where the refugees were, where the politics was, that he truly believed that it was time to move forward and not keep looking backward and bring equality to all sides. And I always remember when, I believe it was a Jordanian soldier killed, I think Israeli civilians. I can't remember the exact, who exactly was involved. But what I do remember is that the King of Jordan went to the grieving Israeli mother and knelt at her feet and apologize. And to me, that is huge. And it's the kind of thing that, the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who I think was also, a man who had been through Israel's wars, who had fought for Israel's survival and for, and to, protect his people, was able to also see the future and know that you couldn't keep carrying on like this, and that two desperately opposed sides needed somehow to get together. So I think the solution to all of this is leadership. You have to have courageous leadership who are willing to, to put their own politics aside and look at the greater good. And as everybody says, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your adversaries, and it takes courage to do that.
And the most dishonest?
Oh, there's been so many of them. I don't want to label a name, but there's been so many. And you just try by reading facts, reading statistics, going back at them. But I will say that I do believe people, in other words, users, consumers of information, now actually more than ever have to be their own police or fact checkers, if you like. They also have a responsibility. We do our very best to bring the facts and the truth, but I do think people have to cross-reference and cross-reference and cross-reference,
And is that's the path to trust, a two-way street with journalists?
Yeah, I think so. And I think individuals, consumers, if you want to call them that, those who are, reading, watching, using online, etc., need to take ownership. And if they want to know where to get the actual facts, they need to seek them, because it is not true that everything is a lie. There's plenty of American and other organizations, news organizations, which have been, going for decades and which have the good housekeeping seal of performance and credibility and integrity. And so that would be my advice.
Well, and that's a bit of an optimistic tone too. I mean, that we can, between journalism and the citizens, we can get there.
I think we have to.
Thank you.
It is a two-way street now.
Cristiane Amanpour, thank you. This, for us fact checkers and journalists, this is just a treat to hear from an ally. Thanks so much for being with us and for joining us on this first of hopefully many festivals celebrating the truth and facts.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Well, again, thanks everyone, and stay tuned. There's lots more from the United Facts of America coming your way.